Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. This is Vince Versace, National Managing Editor of the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce, joining you today for this special podcast with two key leaders from the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario, colloquially known as the mighty RCCAO in our office, for all the advocacy work that they do and work in the construction industry. So I have with me Peter Smith, Chair of RCCAO, and Nadia Todorova, Executive Director of RCCAO. Nadia, Peter, thank you for joining us here on the Construction Record.
Thank you very much for having us, Vince, and amazing pronunciation of my last name. So good job.
No problem. The Italian background kind of helps a little bit. That Peter Smith last name, a little bit tough to get my tongue around. You know what I mean? But as much as we're all joking, we did want to talk about something serious, and we're talking about infrastructure investment. Now, given the impacts of COVID-19 and the pandemic on all coffers, whether federal, provincial, or municipal, there's an impact that we see with our industry here in construction. And that's something that you've taken up the advocacy efforts around that, around ensuring that there's some sort of funding that will allow municipalities to start getting projects out, because we have seen that decline in permits, let's say, municipal permits. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for having us again, Vince. We're very honored to be here and to speak about this very important issue. And as you noted rightly, we have been seeing ever since, spring of last year, kind of a very steady decrease of infrastructure tenders for projects coming down the pipeline from municipalities. And this was obviously very concerning for us, and it remains a concern for us. And what's behind that really is the fact that Ontario municipalities unfortunately have had to reduce their spending and have had to reallocate money from their capital budgets to their operating budgets in order to fill the deficit gap caused by that pandemic. And this is especially true for municipalities with large transit systems. Right? As we know, millions of people are working from home. They're not really taking transit, but at the same time, municipalities are still operating their transit systems. So that expense is still there, but the revenue is not there. So in order to address this, glaring operating budget deficit, municipalities have had to address it by using capital budget dollars. For example, in the city of Toronto, they recently passed their 2021 budget. There is $649 million hole that they will have to use capital funds to address if there is no assistance from the federal or provincial government. So that is a bit of the situation. And obviously, we are very concerned about the lack of infrastructure tenders, because that just means less work for the construction industry. And that means, potentially significant job losses. We did a report in November of 2020 that showed that our industry is facing, if things continue the way that they are, our industry is facing a 41,000 construction-related job losses in our industry. So that is obviously very, very worrying for us.
Peter, how are you seeing it as chair of RCCAO and the stakeholders you have to report to?
Well, my other day job, I'm the executive director of the Heavy Construction Association. We're the people that do bridges. We also do subway tunnels and things like that. It became apparent basically early last summer that cities were going to call a lot fewer tenders. And 2019 was the best year in infrastructure construction on record. In January and February, our biggest concern was where will we get enough skilled workforce? And contractors went into the year with a great backlog. But by the summer, that had changed. Contractors that had large backlogs and projects that lasted a long time were still in good shape. There was a lot of work going on, but some of the contractors that had been looking for work early in the summer were starting to get nervous. And in fact, it was a City of Toronto project, not particularly large, $2 million, that attracted 18 bidders. And that would normally attract 2 or 3 bidders. So that was a sign. In my sector in August, which is traditionally an extremely busy month, we lost 400 jobs, laborer jobs, from the month before. September, again, another drop. So it's been a lean fall, and it's a little bit disproportionate. A contractor, for example, that's working on a long-term project like the Eglinton subway is relatively unaffected because it's a long-term project. But other contractors, particularly small and medium contractors that are looking for work to fill up their order book, were all of a sudden scrambling. And that is the concern. Our sector, the heavy constructor, is very definitely affected, as is the road building sector.
When we look at the funding itself, is it as much about having guaranteed funding numbers presented, or is it about the commitments to, like, here's a hard and fast commitment within the first quarter, we are going to commit something, but we don't know what?
So here's what's a little bit troubling. Way back in 2009, when we had the economic problems all across North America, the federal government stepped up and made investments in infrastructure. However, they saw right then and there that many municipalities did not have good long-term capital plans. So the money was there, they wanted to get it out, but a lot of cities simply didn't have a priority list. So in Ontario, it was mandated that every municipality has to come up with a list of the water projects, the sewage projects, the road projects, the bridge projects, and come up with a priority list for them over the next at least 5 and generally 10 years. So they had that list and they work on that engineering. The problem is now is the municipalities, they know what their priorities are, they know what they need to do, they simply don't have the money. And that's what we're calling on the federal government and the provincial government to step up and help the municipalities, because they are not allowed to go into a deficit mode. And maybe, Nadia, you could talk about the timing concern.
Yes, absolutely. So I think, one of the things that we have been very clear in our advocacy is the fact that, that assistance, the check does not have to come like tomorrow at noon. Simply the federal government sending signals, making commitments, public commitments saying that, we're going to be there again for municipalities like we were in 2020 with the Safe Restart Agreement. I think that would be a very positive sign to municipalities, to their CFOs, and also to our industry, just to know that, help is coming. They're working on it, and that assurance will go a very long way to get projects out the door and to also take advantage of this year's construction season, right? That's part of the problem. It's important for us to have this conversation now. One, as municipalities are doing their budgets for 2021, but also to make sure that the construction season is not lost, right? That old adage of there's 2 seasons in Canada, winter and the construction season, it is true. We do most of our work in the warmer months, weather permitting. So we really want to be able to make sure that we take advantage of that. And we're not having this conversation in August or September, because that will just be detrimental for the industry and, for the economy as well.
And I think that's the trick too, right? When we look at federally, we haven't seen a budget in 2 years. Okay, granted, we have a pandemic that first year, but it'd be, correct me if I'm wrong, it would be helpful to actually have a detailed, like, economic fiscal update of some kind from the feds, right? Because we are going to hear from the province in a couple of days on their budget.
Well, I'd like to, actually, that's a good segue, because we want to thank the province, certainly for everything they did in 2020, but they just recently announced $500 million of new money to go for infrastructure. And we are talking specifically about core infrastructure, roads, bridges, clean water, sewage, things like that, which is great. And the federal government last year did an amazing job stepping up. But this year so far, there's been a lot of silence. So we definitely need their help. And it is concerning to our members. From what we see, we think that the funds needed in 2021 are much less than they were in 2020. Canada did spend a lot of money in COVID relief last year, and municipalities need less because they have a better handle on things. But the reality is the construction industry, the contractors, they came into last year in a good situation, but they've had a lean fall, and they're looking at an extremely lean winter. Now they're hurting. So even though the government doesn't need to come up with as much money, it's a much more acute situation for contractors. They are desperate, and they need work, And I guess what's disconcerting is there's an opportunity to stimulate our economy, get people working in good paying jobs, and all we need is the money. So that is really, or at least the commitment that the governments are going to be there to help us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, although we definitely understand the pressures that the federal government is facing with, having to deal with the pandemic, that's very understandable. But, having a budget in the next few weeks will be very helpful because it really will provide a lot of clarity. It will provide just a lot of certainty around, how they're thinking of spending that money. So, we're hopeful to see a budget in the next few weeks because it would be, it's incredibly needed, as Peter says, because a lot is riding on it.
I'm curious because you both deal with infrastructure, and when you see in commercial media, you sometimes see a discussion about the actual value of infrastructure projects. You know what I mean? Stimulus type projects that are what we cover. You know what I mean? What you folks are engaged in and what we cover. What's kind of your answer to that when people say, why are you putting money into that when we need money in healthcare? We need money in education. We need this. The value. That battle to still present the value of infrastructure still exists, does it not?
Yes, it does. And I guess that's a little bit disturbing because, people don't necessarily appreciate the value of, say, turning on a tap and getting clean water until that's threatened. And there are a lot of situations, for example, in the city of Toronto, where people turn on their taps and the water doesn't come in clean. There are huge leaks in the city system. So the RCCAO worked with the University of Toronto to do a study a number of years ago about the leaky pipes in Toronto. Toronto purifies water out of Lake Ontario, and there is so much leakage, almost 40% of what's purified is lost and simply pumped into the groundwater. That is a huge energy loss, and the power could actually, there's enough energy loss power more than 200,000 homes in the city of Toronto. And when you look at the green commitment, the jobs, it is a great investment. And, I feel bad for the government because everyone is looking for money and, they're trying to prop up the restaurant business. They're trying to prop up the tourism, but it's going to be a few years before those industries come back, but construction can come back right away. And we like to say that putting money into infrastructure is not a gamble, it's an investment. You end up with a hard asset. You end up with local people that are earning a paycheck and paying taxes, suppliers, the concrete industry, the aggregate industry, all of those people are out to work. And it's a lot better to have the economy running on full cylinders in our construction industry.
Nadia, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that when you talk to people about infrastructure, they're kind of saying like, yeah, infrastructure is totally important, right? But I think the concept sometimes just goes right over their heads. And what we're talking about here, right, like that critical infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, the water, the wastewater, as Peter is mentioning, those are really essential components to the well-being of Ontarians. And I think sometimes that understanding is just not maybe there a little bit, but, it's so essential both for the long-term and the short-term prosperity, and not just from the social benefits, but also just from the economics around it, right? Like when you are investing in infrastructure, as Peter mentioned, you're getting a hard asset, but you're also getting a multiplier effect throughout the economy, right? And that multiplier effect is to the tune of 1.46. So for every $1 billion that you invest in infrastructure, the GDP is boosted by an average additional $1.46 billion. So it's an industry that has both very social benefits, but also incredible economic benefits, right? And infrastructure and construction, they're going to be major players of the economic recovery, both of the province, but also of the country. And, as Peter said, it really is not a gamble, but it's an investment when you are allocating money for infrastructure. It creates jobs, it creates a hard asset, and it really has a very positive multiplier snowball effect, if you wish.
Thank you for that, Nadia. It's funny, you mentioned the multiplier effect of understanding the economic impact on infrastructure investments. But there's also, there's a domino effect too with the lack of investment and the lack of activity on the labor side, the skilled trade side, things that we typically talk about a lot in earnest around construction. And as Peter alluded to, at one time we were talking about extremely tight markets and trying to find bodies to fill the need for the projects. But where are we at now as you see it?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for that, Vince. So in terms of the labor side and the human side of this, one thing to note is that the jobs that would be lost are good, well-paying jobs in an industry that welcomes people from all walks of life. And it also would be devastating devastating impact to young people that are trying to get into the skilled trades. And that is an issue that we have worked incredibly hard on for the past several years. We have, as an industry, focused on getting young people into the industry. We have focused on getting women into the industry. We have focused on getting, people of minorities into the industry, because we really need that labor supply of people into the construction and the infrastructure industry. And construction as a whole is such a gateway to the middle class for new Canadians, for people who want that social mobility. And when we have that lack of projects coming down the pipeline, that really is creating an unintended consequence that will have very long-term damage to returning and to kind of getting that our labor market to the point of the equilibrium that we need. And I don't know if Peter, if you want to add something additional to that.
No, I think it's, you're right. It's both the skilled trades and the young people that are in community college programs for construction and architectural technology. They've made a commitment to their education. They like the field. And unfortunately, there are just going to be no opportunities for co-op summer projects. And it is very disconcerting. It's a great place. I've spent my whole career in this industry, and I've been encouraging young people for years, and we finally got some momentum going, and this situation is going to kill it. So I really earnestly ask senior levels of government to step up, and particularly right now, the federal government, because it doesn't take a lot of money to get this problem solved, but we need that money, and at very least, we need the commitment in the short term. Thank you.
Perfect. So with that, folks, if you want to learn more about RCCAO, you could go to rccao.com. There's contact information there if you want to reach out to Peter and Nadia or anybody else. Let's pay attention to the 24th. Let's see what the province brings officially, and I'll be curious to see what the feds bring for us, whether it's as we were saying, a budget or a fiscal update with some meat on the bone, so this industry can get going. But once again, I want to thank Nadia and Peter for their time today. Anything else you just want to add as we say goodbye?
No, thank you for having us. It was a great chat.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Take care.